Good morning. I'm delighted to be with you. Thank you for inviting me to join you. I'm here as a non-executive director of the Financial Reporting Council, a representative of the Impact Investing Institute, where I lead their work on better reporting, and of course, most proudly, a member of the Global Advisory Board of the UK-India venture capital firm Pontaq. I'm just going to give a very brief 5-minute introduction to the Impact Investing Institute and our work on better reporting. We're a sister organisation to the Green Finance Institute, and you heard the keynote speech this morning from Sir Roger Gifford. Just a couple of slides here. First of all, the definition of impact investing. For those of you not familiar, we define it as consisting of the investment in the share or loan capital of companies and enterprises that not only measure and report their wider impact on society, but also hold themselves accountable for delivering and increasing positive impact. So there's a key element for us of intentionality and a willingness to be held accountable. This slide helps explain the connection between ESG investing, sustainable investing, and impact investing. You see this spectrum here. Responsible investing is called by many as ESG investing. That's where ESG investing started out, where people looked at environmental and social factors very much through the lens of mitigating reputational risk and risk to essentially to financial performance. Sustainable investing we see as investing again very much looking at environmental and social factors, but with a perspective of benefiting all stakeholders. Impact-driven investing takes account of environmental and social factors, but with this intentionality to contribute to solutions and ultimately to contribute to the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. And so increasingly, ESG investing is all types of investing for which environmental and social factors are taken into account. You'll be aware, I'm sure, of many definitions and stabs at assessing the size of the impact investing market. 444 billion, according to the Global Sustainable Investment Alliance, and potentially set to grow to 26 trillion. It all depends, of course, on how you define impact investing, and there isn't a commonly held definition. The Impact Investing Institute represents the coming together of the National Advisory Board on Impact Investing and the Social Impact Investing Task Force. We're funded by the Department for Digital, Culture, Media and Sport, which houses the government's Inclusive Economy Unit, from the Department for International Development, and we have Ryan here from CDC, and the City of London Corporation hosting the event today. Our mission is to accelerate the growth and improve the effectiveness of the UK impact investing market by mobilising more capital that contributes to solving social challenges. And my own particular area of expertise in relation to better reporting. I'm sure you'll all appreciate that in order for capital to flow from asset owners who increasingly care about environmental and social issues to investable enterprises that are in the business of making an environmental and social impact, for capital to flow across the investment chain, there must be consistent, comparable, transparent impact reporting. More easily said than achieved. We've done some work here looking at the state of impact reporting as it is today. You can see from this slide that impact reporting is on a journey. It's at an early stage, still very fragmented. There are no commonly agreed standards for impact reporting, even by sector or theme. There are no widely adopted standards, and still, certainly, we're somewhere away from mandated standards. But there's an enormous amount of progress in this area. So our vision for transparent, consistent, comparable impact reporting that reflects and drives real impact. How do we intend to achieve that? By working with others to test, influence, and implement global impact reporting standards in the legal and regulatory context of the UK. And our means to do that, building a coalition, advancing exemplary impact reporting standards, influencing the consensus on global impact reporting standards, and facilitating a reporting implementation. And in terms of the partnership with India, I asked my chief executive, Sarah Gordon, who leads the Impact Investing Institute, for a message to the conference this morning, particularly focusing on the relevance of our work to India and the partnership between India and the Impact Investing Institute in the UK. And she says, one of our core funders is DFID. We expect to provide support to national advisory boards outside the UK, including the National Advisory Board of India. We look forward to knowledge exchange with the relevant people and organisations in India so that we can learn from each other's experience in impact investment. We'll be designing training materials which can be used to raise awareness and confidence around impact investment. Our website and social media channels will allow people to access the highest quality information on impact investment. And we're looking forward to working with the UK government when it leads the G7 in 2021 to put impact investment high up the global agenda. Thank you. Delighted to introduce my fellow panelists. Shiv Sehgal, President and co-head of the Institutional Clients Group in Edelweiss Global Investment. Dhanpal Jhaveri, Managing Partner of Everstone Capital and CEO of Eversource Capital. And Ryan Wagner, Investment Director of CDC.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. It's always a bit tricky being on a panel that's keeping the audience away from their lunch, so we make sure that we'll make it short and insightful. Before I get into my presentation, I just kind of, wanted to add, Ajit and Raj spoke very insightfully and gave us some perspectives. Ajit gave us some numbers on, how important greenhouse emissions in India are going to be. And one of the earlier panelists spoke about, in particular, he used the phrase sense of purpose. And I think given the sheer size and the challenge and the opportunity set that India presents, that phrase cannot be more apt than in India today. There is an urgency, sense of purpose, but we also realize that, let's not forget, while we can talk about the EU standards and the US standards, India is still a very emerging country. We have gone through some very significant structural reforms, and most of the industries only opened up in the last 2 decades, I would say. So I think there is a landscape and a canvas to be drawn, and if the regulators, the private investors, and all the key stakeholders, can get the landscape right, the entire world will benefit from this sense of purpose. With that, we had a couple of pointers given for our presentation. So in that regard, I'll just kind of begin here. Sustainable development goals. It's a very powerful philosophy, and more importantly, I think it's a great framework for getting all the key sustainable partners together and developing this sense of purpose that we just talked about. I think the players that are coming together for this frontier, and it's not only, we've talked about a lot about governments and corporates, but there's a whole gamut of, key stakeholders out there, whether that's stock exchanges, financial regulators, and I think, let's not belittle how important academia has been in ESG. I think I was kind of doing some research and I realized this whole forefront, especially in Europe, has actually been brought about with the first few papers that were written by academia about 2 decades back. So, that recognition is always there. And I think a lot of the stats and a lot of the key metrics that come up are also being driven by academia. So, I think it's a great framework which is getting all the key stakeholders together. And in my view, I think the best and most important underlying change that is occurring is that there is a great awareness among investors today, especially in Europe, which are kind of leading this, this whole ESG wave. There is a sense of purpose and awareness of where they want to put their money. And I think as this key philosophy becomes more global, it's very interesting that investors are actually driving this growth because they are driving where money should be put in projects. And that's very important from a framework perspective. More importantly, I think governments are becoming more cautious and investors are becoming more aware. So that two philosophies together are binding a lot of partnerships, and that's the key purpose of this whole conference is what UK and India can achieve together in getting this canvas right. Today in this room, I think this entire ecosystem together is the best example. We have academia, we have long-term investors, hedge funds, sell-side research, service providers, everyone coming together and trying to kind of understand how we can better educate and make it aware, not just only from an India perspective, but investors, and we can drive the right kind of growth that we want in India. Sorry, I'll just go back. In terms of the partnerships, I think there's a lot of several curated initiatives that have happened in the recent past. I think it's too early to judge them, but the one in particular, and I just noticed that that we have a 315 panel that is going to talk about a lot about this, and that's the River Ganga Basin project, and the UK there was an MOU done, which basically has enabled the UK to support the government of India in sustainable management of water resources. Now, why this is important for some of those who may not know about the Ganges River Basin, it's extremely important. It caters to 600 million population, and in terms of statistics, that population density of that geography that we're talking about is almost 1,000 people per square mile. To compare that in terms of the UK population density is about 250. So we are talking about 5 times the size of just the UK density population. And this was a pet project of Prime Minister Modi as well when he came to power in 2014 about the river, cleaning the river Ganga. And I think a lot of good work has gone into there. UK is collaborative with the Indian government there, and the fact that the Indian government had taken this initiative has helped, and we can actually, at ground level, when you go and speak to people, and there have been documentaries coming up recently, in the last 18 months, there's a lot of good work done, and it's actually having impact on people's life, which is what the sense of purpose we talked about. There have been some other projects as well. There is the India Newton Fund. A few of the panels earlier talked about the GGEF fund, which is a commitment about 500 million pounds. The Newton Fund is in the next 3 years, we'll see about a 750 million commitment. So, we are definitely the right, and I have to say, the UK is taking the right initiatives here. So India has got a lot to benefit from this and learn from all the expertise here. And I'm glad that this is happening, and if India can do that and partner that with some of the Scandinavian and the more developed markets and where access of capital is there, I think it'll be a great benefit within the ESG and the SDG framework. For Indian corporates, Ajit and Raj gave us very good perspective on corporate governance standards. I'll just kind of deviate away from this and say that yes, India has a lot to go from, in terms of corporate governance. I don't think I can, put it articulately even better than Ajit said, and given his experiences on the buy side. But what I would say is that, I have been on a couple of recruitment panels over the last, I would say, 6 to 7 years. And I think Arvind, one of the audience members, and we were talking about in the coffee break, that shift that I see in the new entrepreneurial age society that's coming up, or in terms of the new age culture leadership that's going to emerge in the the young 20-year-olds and the early 30-year-olds, there is a sense of social value to that. And I think that lacked in some of the family oligarchy monopolies that kind of governed India in the past. And that's very heartening and encouraging from my perspective to see that at the ground level. And if we can inculcate that social values, which is what ESG is all about, and I think, India has a very bright and promising future. Yes, there have been a lot of issues. All investing panels that I attend, the biggest concern is you need to get corporate governance in right. Right? As Ajit mentioned earlier as well, that the first question that when you want to invest in India is the management corrupt or not? Right? And in that regard, a lot of initiative has actually happened. In my view, it's not just governance alone, but India needs to benchmark itself in getting the global reporting initiatives correct as well. And I think in that regard, a lot of good stuff has already happened. SEBI and the UK regulators, we're talking about partnerships. I think India can learn a lot from the FRC and the FSCA exchange framework. And if India and the Indian government's corporates can develop these best practices, I think it's going to be a massive benefit to the entire Indian market GDP. Jal actually gave the best representation of this, and we had Sherman and Howard from MSCI already talking about this. I'm not going to spend too much time on this. The only stat that I'll leave is the fact that, which kind of resonated with me, that the ESG benchmark index over the last 10, 15 years has actually outperformed by a significant margin on the MSCI India index, which talks about the fact that this style of investing is working. In India, I would just add that also the reason of this outperformance is the fact that bulk of the ESG index companies, the constituents, are also the large caps. And predominantly over the last 5 years, a bulk of the money from passive and active investing has gone into the large caps in India. So there's a bit of an underlying story to that, which would, we can't just take that, if you go into ESG invested index, you'll do better. But there's also the fact that India has seen a massive divergence in large cap versus the mid cap over the last 2-3 years. Again, I've already spoken about this, but here I just want to mention one point. In 2 years back, actually, the government of India and SEBI initiated something called the Corporate Governance Initiative, and there's a committee formed which is called the Kotak Committee. And, they're actually forcing companies, which never happened in the past, to bring up their corporate governance and reporting initiatives. And they're making it mandatory. And I think as time lapses, corporate governance issues, because of this committee alone, is going to be very beneficial. And lastly, Jal has actually already mentioned that we are one of the only, Edelweiss, is actually leading the ESG frontier in India. We have a dedicated ESG team. And in that, endeavor, if there is anyone in this room who wants to partner, engage, use our expertise, provide advice to us, we are more than happy to engage from that angle. And I would like to thank the organizers here for getting the entire ecosystem in one room and having this debate open today. So thanks.
I guess a very good afternoon to all of you. Olivia, Ryan, Shiv, thanks. So the G part is something I think Shiv talked about, governance part. What we are doing at Eversource is really focusing more on the climate part of the business. To start with, maybe a 30-second advertisement on what Eversource Capital is all about. We are a joint venture. It's a UK-India joint venture with Everstone Capital and Lightsource BP, creating an equal JV to manage what is, I think, India's first really climate-focused fund. And this was on the back of an initiative set up by the UK and the Indian governments to anchor this fund, provide the initial capital, and select a fund manager to run the entire fund management business. So this happened sometime last year. Again, both the prime ministers at that point in time, Prime Minister May and Prime Minister Modi, launched this fund. It was announced in April. We did the first close in October and have been deploying capital since then. So what's the whole climate opportunity about? I think there are 4 major global mega trends which is driving this. First is the way we are actually generating, distributing, and consuming electricity is changing the way the world is actually focused on climate. One, clean energy, which also has its attendant challenges of being intermittent, but at the same time, also getting to the point of consumption in a distributed manner. Second, digitization and smart grid. Historically, energy was all about one-way traffic. You produced and you supplied. Now, actually, there are many new ways and models which are emerging, and that's causing its own challenges and therefore opportunities also in terms of how do you create smarter grids and how do you manage electricity through the grids. The third is EV, massive revolution. We are already seeing many parts of the transportation ecosystem beginning to get challenged, and I think over the next few years we'll start getting disrupted in a very massive way. as the cost of delivering a kilometer of transportation keeps coming down through EV. And finally, consumers' choice and their ability to control what they want to do. I think that's going to determine the way, and we've already seen people like Tesla, et cetera, trying to innovate on the consumer end, other smart energy companies coming in and basically figuring out how do you actually not only become a consumer, but even a generator of energy while you're basically not consuming it. So all these trends are something that we believe will drive the investment opportunity over the next few years. The energy mix, if you look at it, fossil fuel driven and moving to renewable energy, we are seeing for the first time coal, which from the start of the industrial era has been, I would say, the platform on which energy has been produced, starting to kind of becoming a lower share in the overall energy basket globally. And renewables is the one which is going over the next 20 years, going to take and possibly become anywhere between 25 to 35% of the energy basket. As you move to looking at where this story is all, I would say, unfolding, it's emerging markets. Already we've seen emerging markets being a big chunk, or would I say larger than the OECD markets in terms of energy consumption. And the growth, again, coming from those markets, we are continuing to see that if we move forward over the next, 10, 20 years, this trend being very, very well established, where anywhere between 6 to 8% growth is expected. China, India driving a lot of that growth, and other parts of the Africa, et cetera, also contributing to that. EV penetration, I think the auto industry possibly is right now in the absolute throes of disruption. We are already seeing mass transportation, where you're traveling over a certain minimum range kilometers, economics of that vehicle becoming far lower than what it is for a diesel vehicle, and even competitive against cleaner energy forms such as CNG. India and China, again, are driving a big part of that. China currently, and maybe towards the next 20 years, India will start contributing. We're already seeing energy outlook estimates for electrification of the transportation industry actually being reconfigured year on year based on the rapid uptake of electric vehicles across the world. And finally, I think even technologies such as autonomous technologies, et cetera, are going to change the way we actually deal with transportation. I think it's from I would say, a industry which was largely 95% underutilized. Typically if you drive a car, you only utilize 5% of the capacity of the car in a time of a day or, through the life cycle of the ownership of the car. As you get into more shared and autonomous-based shared vehicular transportation, you will start seeing that again change the way you will actually use energy. Finally, I would say that all of this, the ability to integrate these different forms and these different trends into doing three things: smart solutions for customers, smart energy supply models, and smart financing structures is what's going to drive disruption across this entire industry. Coming to India, I think the story is pretty clear. We continue to be the fastest growing, from an energy consumption perspective, whether it's coal, whether it's oil and gas, et cetera. At the same time, global warming is driving massive amounts of climate action. India has been at the forefront. We've seen literally over the last 5 years particularly, we being party to most key climate accords globally, whether it be the Paris Accord, the Copenhagen Accord, and even our own kind of nationally determined climate goals that we have introduced to make sure how do we basically leapfrog what was typically an industrial, I would say, economy challenge, not necessarily to kind of fund or I would say support growth through fossil fuels, but actually replace using clean energy. And to support that, what we are seeing is an ecosystem where the government from a political will perspective, the bureaucracy from a regulatory oversight perspective, and private sector from a financial and operating perspective, all coming together for the first time, and there being meaningful efforts on the ground to bring about this change. We also see the fact that technology will play a key role in the way this all gets tied together. Both IoT and the ability to essentially reduce the cost of CapEx through global supply chains is something, again, we believe will actually deliver this new form of energy at much lower costs. All this, what does it mean in terms of total, what we see as the opportunity over the next 20 years? Close to $3 trillion a big chunk of it coming from clean and energy efficient solutions, energy production, renewable energy, mobility and transportation infrastructure, we think will actually take at least, whether it's be charging infrastructure, whether it be electric mobility solutions, B2G, B2B, B2C, and then finally even looking at wastewater agriculture as ways to drive climate change action and investments in those opportunities in India. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I thought I'd take a few minutes to comment on who CDC is, the type of work that the UK as CDC and the Department for International Development has done in partnering with India to promote sustainable investing and investing over the long term. So the UK Development Finance Institution is CDC. We were established in 1948. We're the world's oldest development finance institution and have been backed by UK taxpayer funding. We're independent from the government itself, so we run a separate board. Day-to-day operations are really independent from the UK government, and we have a dual mandate to deliver development impact, sustainability, and then also commercial returns. So we consider ourselves distinctive as a DFI, effective in terms of an investor cross-border, and then ambitious in terms of the places that we invest, not only in India, but also in our other geography, which is Africa. So we really just focus on South Asia, primarily India, and then Africa. Over the years, that's changed somewhat, but we found that these have been the two most important areas for both the UK as well as CDC. So CDC as an investor, we consider ourselves a long-term investor. We use our own balance sheet. We don't have to report back to underlying investors who are looking for capital, return to them in an inflexible way. We're rigorous and take a commercial approach to how we invest. We have quite a strong network, both in Asia and in Africa, given the long presence that we've had in both markets, over 70 years in both markets. And then it's been mentioned earlier here in other panels, but the importance around business integrity as well as environmental and social practices. So when we look at an investment, the business integrity angle is very binary in terms of whether we can trust a promoter and work with a promoter. And that's just something fundamental to the way we invest. And then environmental and social, that's something that we can work with groups and we can help to enhance what they already do or really change the practices that they've already set up and develop those practices over time. So how we've developed our portfolio specific to India, you can see across our geographies that we operate, India is about a third of our portfolio, and that's grown quite significantly over the last number of years. Our total balance sheet is about $5.5 billion, and about 1.8 of that is invested in India. Almost $300 million were invested just last year. We often work with fund managers, so groups that can help with their local networks and deploy capital effectively. In our markets in India, we work with over 50 different fund managers. And between our funds and our direct investment arms, we have invested in more than 300 companies, and we support roughly 900,000 jobs, which is one of our ambitions. I won't spend much on this slide, but we've been active in India for about 35 years. We back some of the more well-known companies today, like Apollo Tires, Punjab Tractors, UTI, who's now Axis Bank, IDFC. These were all small businesses when CDC initially invested in them and have become relatively well-known today. Some of our recent investments in India over the past number of years, example of microfinance institution Veritas, which has reached farmers, women in some of the poorer areas of India. IANA, which is a $100 million investment in a renewables platform across India. Big Basket, this is an online retailer within India. We invested through a fund in this company about 7 years ago when it first started, and then we made a significant equity investment in it just earlier this year. It supports more than 5,000 farmers directly in terms of their sourcing. We also appreciate that technology and technology-enabled businesses will be very important for long-term sustainability, delivering products and services to clients at a cheaper and more affordable mechanism. So venture capital funds have been important to us. We've developed a venture capital program and have leveraged fund managers to effectively deploy that for us. Then also focusing on more sustainable living, so affordable housing. We've partnered with Pontaq Bank to develop an affordable housing platform. And this is mainly focused in Tier 3 and Tier 4 cities within India. And also it's been a theme throughout the day here, but climate. So we're looking at mitigation, adaptation, and resiliency strategies. We invested in a resource efficiency fund just earlier this year that is focused on adaptation and resiliency. So looking forward, India has identified 7 to 8 SDGs that are very important to the forward-looking economy within India and priorities. So you can see them there, and CDC has been aligning itself with a number of these SDGs. So job creation, all around alleviation of poverty, decent work and economic growth, healthcare, education, so SDG 4, SDG 10, climate, that's been an important one, and something that we call a 2X challenge, which this is really equality and gender equality. So enhancing the number of women that are on boards and within management of companies that we invest in. And then this map in the middle, so what we've done here is we've taken a very granular approach to how we invest in India, where we've broken it up by states. And so we categorize them by letters, where D is really where we find it less difficult to invest, so states like Maharashtra or Tamil Nadu. And then harder places where we really don't see commercial capital being directed, and we want to see more capital coming into these states, so states like Bihar or West Bengal. So it's really a focus for us to try to deliver capital to projects in those states. So with that, I'll wrap it up here.
This panel is sitting between you and lunch, so we will make sure to end at 1:15. I'm just going to address a couple of questions to the panel and then open it up perhaps to just one round of questions from the floor. Key question then, where are the big pools of capital which the market should be seeking to access in order to make maximum contribution to the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals? Domestic pools, international pools, private, public? What do you think?
So if I can, kind of respond to that slightly differently, I think the capital generally follows. The opportunity is the one which leads. You can kind of divide the world into, I would say, at least from an infrastructure perspective, the OECD and the non-OECD market. But India is unique from a perspective that it is a market by itself. The opportunity to create value on a long-term basis is there. But at the same time, it's got entry challenges, which most global investors find very complex to address. So how do you basically attract a global pool of capital, but in a manner which is deployed using local capabilities and local experiences? I think that's the kind of conundrum which most investors have. I would say the natural home base is clearly the North American markets, which is sitting on the largest pool of capital. But if you think from at least from an ESG and more from a climate perspective, Europe is the one which is actually taking the lead. And we are seeing a lot more proactiveness from European investors wanting to address the climate issue. and therefore see how they can proactive look to find ways to invest in that particular opportunity. I would say local capital has always been a little bit of a challenge, especially in illiquid asset classes. We've therefore, one, regulatory-wise, it's restricted with its pension funds, insurance companies, to a large extent are restricted in terms of where they can allocate capital. Most of it is fixed income. A lot of it is taken by the government itself, which competes extensively for local capital. And the rest of it really is more because of the safety issue around, I would say retail investors who have exposure to the pension funds and the insurance companies. Basically, therefore, very little of that capital really goes into the alternative pool of capital at all.
Very good. Ryan, you've got a huge amount of experience in investing into India. What are your thoughts on this?
Sure. I think Dhanpal's response makes sense in terms of where some of the pools sit. I think sovereign wealth funds, to a large extent, some of them have partnered with various groups within India, various banks and investment firms. I think we'll have to see more come from them. I think we've seen pension plans, primarily North America, having backed away from India over the last number of years, not seeing returns come from India. So I think returns have to be there. They have to come back in order for that capital to flow in. And I think the domestic market, I think it's starting to evolve. It's filled a bit of the gap that has been left in the last number of years from some of those international investors. So family offices, insurance companies, I think they are moving forward with thinking about private equity. Some have made the move, and some are seeing groups like SIDBI and other government-related organizations starting to invest in private equity. And I think that'll be very important for climate. That'll be very important for private equity as an industry.
Very helpful. Shiv?
India is a current account deficit country. So I think whether it is mobilization of foreign money or domestic money, the dire need of the India infrastructure and the whole ESG space is very important. In that regard, I think, there are challenges, as, Dhanpal just initiated that from a foreign perspective. I think while the government can talk about, make it easy and come to India and invest, I think from a regulatory and a process-driven initiative, it needs to make it a lot more simpler. But more importantly, I want to, tell this audience that India is going through a tectonic shift in terms of, financialization of domestic pool of money. The mutual fund industry has, suddenly seen a massive surge over the last 4 or 5 years in India. And in that regard, I think awareness needs to be brought into the retail pool of money. And to give you some more stats, 70% of daily traded volume in India is still retail. And by that definition alone, I think we need to make the domestic pool of money more aware about ESG concepts, the benefits, and the need. And, I think both a combination of, educating them and initiatives by such partnerships and the government will fulfill that void.
Very good. Let's open it up to questions. I'll just take a group of 4, and then the panel can pick and choose the questions that they're most interested in. At the front here.
Ajit Dayal from Quantum. Question specifically for Ryan and I guess for the other allocators in the room. So while one's trying to save the world and recognize that, say, for example, ground zero is India for climate change, when we talk to institutions like CDC and others, we get these buckets. You've got a private equity bucket, you've got a listed equity bucket, you have a fixed income bucket. How about a save the world bucket? What if every pensioner wrote to you all in every UK city wrote to you say, hey, please allocate 5% of my pension to save the world? Because it's so frustrating to just talk to someone and then you have this great idea, people love it and say, well, I have no bucket to put you in.
Yeah.
And it's not about India. It's not an India bucket. You spoke about returns in India being disappointing, and they have been, and I apologize for that, being Indian. But this is about saving the world. So it's beyond India. It's not an India allocation, not emerging market allocation, not fixed income, not private equity, not public. So I hope you all can think a little more broadly. That'd be very helpful.
I think that was directed at you, Ryan.
Sure.
So you could choose to duck it, but do you want to answer that one now?
Well, I think really specifically over the last year, you've seen a massive change in investor mindset. And I think a large part of this has been driven by the public and the media, but climate being put into a completely separate bucket. So I think, and there may be geographic mixes to that with some investors, but I think moving away from fixed income and equities and listed, I think climate is becoming its separate asset class, at least with a number of mainstream investors.
Okay, so that's an encouraging message. More questions in the middle there. I might take these one at a time with just one response, and then we'll try and get more people through, I think.
Hello, I'm Michael Joseph. I work for Brunel University, London, managing innovation partnerships. My question to the panelists, some of you already mentioned about different Indo-UK collaborative projects and partnerships in innovation. So what has been your experience of working with industries, research institutions for, developing innovation labs, and then that could be scaled up? Like as a university, we work with the Indo-UK projects with the Department of Biotechnology in India and Maharashtra State Institute of Technology and
Very
others. But in terms of scaling it up, so we still face that as a challenge.
Thank you. So a question on the practicalities of partnering in India. Shiv, Dhanpal, who would like to take that?
Yeah, I think if you think about any kind of constructs of any partnership, it's got to be something that actually stands the test of time, right? What is it that the partnership is really about, and what are you trying to achieve? What we've seen, at least in our experiences, where we've aligned not just the vision, but the execution plan of any partnership, and we both agreed what we're going to do together as partners to achieve that. That clarity at the beginning is what, in my view, ends up being possibly, I would say, least path of resistance to getting things done. Because in India, the problem is not about strategy, it's really about execution. And like everything else, most plans fall because they're not well thought through in terms of how you're going to deliver execution. So we've seen all types of partnerships, from technology partnerships to brand partnerships to full financial tie-ups. And we make it clear right in the beginning, let's figure out what we want to do and how we're going to go get it done.
Okay, very good. Some practical tips. This lady on the second table here.
I'm going to stand up. My name is Lopa Patel. I feel I'm representing all the women in the room here. So,
excellent, go for it.
Let me ask a question. We've discussed a great many things over the past few panels, especially things like reversing climate change. The elephant in the room for me is, can the panel talk about how to control population, and how does population growth, particularly in India, play into the ESG
Very interesting,
debate.
and good to bring in the S of ESG. Shiv, are you able
So
to
I
speak
think,
to this?
yeah, absolutely. India is structurally challenged with the number of people it has, right? India has 440 million children alone, which create a need for education. That itself, I mean, UK has a population of 60, 70 million people, so you're looking at almost 7-8x of population just in in children versus the entire diaspora. Add to that the fact that a bulk of this is in rural areas, right? So you may bucket it in terms of just population, but the reality is that you need healthcare, you need infrastructure to get for all these other avenues such as education. India has never adopted a single child policy like China, right? I think, and India probably cannot adopt that because it's a democratic country. And in reality, in hindsight, if it was up to me, I think, at some stage in the past, a policy like that would have immensely benefited India. But at the same time, the reason we are talking about India is this growth opportunity and the demographics that, we have this working age population for the next 20, 30 years, which is going to drive a lot of industries globally because of the fact that we have such, English-speaking, educated, working-age population within the 18 to 35-year gap in India. So while there are challenges, it represents an opportunity. Jal spoke about the fact that almost, I think the number was 600 million people that need to be re-educated to just get employability. So it has challenges. We are all aware of it. I think the government, and this is for the first time I'm seeing at least the right initiatives by the government in the last 3-4 years, historically, India has had governments where a lot was spoken about for limelight and you know, for making the right newspaper headlines. But the first time I feel in the last 3-4 years, actual grassroots implementation is happening, execution is happening, crony capitalism is going away. You know, we have had digitalization of Aadhaar cards, subsidies being put directly into bank accounts. The reality is, you know, we have come through, as I said in my presentation as well, you know, India is emerging, right? And it's emerging from almost 60 years of not having an open economy as well, right? So it will take time for cultural shifts to happen, right? We cannot judge it over a period of 2 or 3 years. I think you know, you need to look at over a period of 10 years, or you know, the initiatives that Modi is trying to do to have at least 2 or 3 terms for the right, you know, endeavors to be put in place and see execution.
Thank you, Shiv. We've got time for just one more question. I'm going to take it from the gentleman there with the pink shirt.
Hi, I'm Prashant Say from Climate Bonds Initiative. I just got a question about misconceptions. Having sort of spoken to investors in the West, what kind of common misconceptions are there about India that you always have to put right?
Interesting, perceptions. Some people say perception's reality.
Yeah, I was
Who would
going
like
to say
to?
that.
Who would like to take
No,
this?
absolutely. Look, purely from an investing world's perspective, I think India, I think someone already mentioned, is a market which is actually now fairly well understood in the global investing community. And where they see a problem is in terms of, one, the market's ability to generate returns. 2 is with the transparency around that in terms of how it actually gets delivered. And, you know, I would say to a large extent the macro issues around currency, the, you know, political, I would say, to a certain extent, and more administrative flip-flops which keep happening, whether it's at the center or the state, which causes its own dynamics. And then finally, I think relative to other markets, right? Because you're competing for capital with 50 other economies in the world. And I think that is something that is not communicated well enough internally as well as externally. That how do you position this in a relative way rather than basically in an absolute manner. So some of these things, if you can try and communicate better, I think it should basically help the Indian cause.
So just one last question for each of the panel members, and that is, if there was one message that you wanted your audience to take away today, what would it be? And while you're thinking, I'll give my one message, which links into the very good point made by the lady here at the front, and that is how the E and the S are completely integrated. When you look at the Sustainable Development Goals, even though they might seem to be, some of them, either E or S, the reality is that in order to achieve any of those Sustainable Development Goals, we need an integrated approach to both the environment and social issues, notably housing and health and well-being. Shiv, your one single message.
I think, as you said, ESG, you know, they're all interlinked. As investors, you know, you are driving that change, and you know, if you choose appropriate investing products, you can drive that change, you know, for the right cause.
Okay, Ryan, one message.
Yeah, I think, I mean, we're patient capital and we sit and think about a lot of these things and we're continuing to evolve strategy. I think the importance around some of these areas like climate, like healthcare, like education within India, we don't have a lot of time to wait, so we need to encourage and mobilize investors to really think about these things. And even if it's not for the returns, if it's for the better of the country, I think it's a well-served purpose.
Okay, so this is urgent, impact first. Dhanpal.
I think it's identifying the right partner to basically allocate capital, because in the noise, we tend to basically lose the substance. So I think India tends to create a lot of noise, but focuses very little on the substance.
Very interesting. I'm very grateful to my panelists. It's been a privilege to work with them to achieve this short presentation for you. Thank you.